Welcome today. This is Brother Lauren Larson, and I will be giving you today instructions concerning chapter-by-chapter outlines. In every class where I teach a book of the Bible, such as Genesis, Exodus, Romans, 1 Corinthians, etc., I always require the student to outline the entirety of that book that we're teaching. Now, this isn't an overview outline where major subjects encompass chapters. This is a chapter-by-chapter outline, and that can be a little bit confusing for the student who has never done it or has not found the tools yet by which it can be done quickly and efficiently. So this training video is for the purpose of teaching you how to answer that assignment, and you should have before you a handout or a PDF, information concerning chapter-by-chapter outlines. That's what it says on the top of the page, and there's information front and back, just one simple page, front and back. Information concerning chapter-by-chapter outlines. Now, follow this with me if you would. In all my classes, which we study a specific book of the Bible, an outline of that book will be required. As I've already said, this is not an overview outline. I will probably give an overview outline of each book during the introductory portion of the class. Instead, the outline you will be required to do will be a chapter-by-chapter outline. First, you are to divide each chapter of the specific book into sections. You must divide each chapter into at least 3 distinct sections. At times, this may seem difficult, but be sure you follow these instructions. A failure to divide each chapter into at least 3 sections, and we'll call them paragraphs from here on out, to fail to divide a chapter into at least 3 paragraphs will cause you to have a very poor grade in this assignment. Third paragraph, chapter divisions are totally subjective. What does that mean? That means you're the one that makes the final decision as to where to divide that chapter. There's no right or wrong. Now, there certainly is better locations for chapter divisions, and we'll talk about how to find those. But you decide where the divisions are in each chapter. There is no wrong way to divide the chapter. However, let me encourage you to follow a few simple guidelines. A paragraph, and you'll hear me talk about this a lot, a paragraph consists of one basic thought, one premier thought. In English in grade school, we learned that a thesis statement or a thesis sentence usually was then accompanied by all kinds of information about that thesis or that major thought in the remainder of a paragraph. And the Bible, being a literary work, can be addressed in the same way. So a paragraph consists of one basic thought, theme, or idea. Therefore, it makes perfect sense to divide each chapter into paragraphs. In other words, you're dividing the chapter into segments of thought, where the author of that particular book shifts subjects, where you see a change in subjects, or you see an emphasis on one thing over another, or a separation in the discourse. This is a great place for a paragraph. In many cases, here's the good news, scholars have gone before you and marked many Bibles indicating where they believe a paragraph division should be. In other words, where a topic ends and a new one begins. Many scholars have already done that work for you. And so, as you study to divide a chapter into paragraphs, you can utilize what they've already done. Now, just always assume, and I'll put this here and it's in your notes as well on the instructions, you can always assume that a paragraph starts in verse 1. So a new paragraph begins in verse 1. There are some times when you might disagree with the paragraph divisions and you feel that it's a run over or leftover from the previous chapter. Again, chapter divisions are totally subjective. They are up to you. But I want you to look at the different ways that scholars have marked paragraphs within the confines of chapters. Because again, where I divide my chapters up, I'll begin, before I study a book, dividing those chapters into paragraphs, into divisions, based on where scholars say they exist. Now, if I feel later, after time of study or a couple of years of study or teaching, that I can come up with better divisions, then I'll make them. I feel totally free to do that. There is, again, no right or wrong way, but there are helps, and this is one. First of all, look at my first example of how these paragraphs can be identified in some Bibles. In some Bibles, paragraphs are denoted by an emboldened number. In other words, the correlating number that goes with the verse. We say John 3:16, so perhaps verse 16 would be emboldened. An emboldened number means that the print around that particular number is emboldened. It's darker, it's heavier, and scholars have marked the Bible that way. When a new paragraph begins, the corresponding number of the verse is emboldened. Now, having tried to explain it to you, look at the example. That's the best way. Example 1, recognizing the emboldened letter. You'll know that this encompasses verses John 1 through 10. And you can see in my example where verse 1 begins the paragraph. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 2 is regular print. It's not emboldened, so a new paragraph doesn't start. Verse 3 is not emboldened. Verse 4 is not emboldened. Verse 5 is not emboldened. But when you come to the number 6, you'll see that it is heavily emboldened. It's darkened. It's much heavier print. That is a clue that scholars have already decided that verses 1 through 5 contain one major thought, and that there's a shift in thought starting with the 6th verse. Thus they emboldened 6. So if you were dividing the John 1 into paragraph divisions, what you would do is say, well, the first division is 1 through 5. And then a new division would start in 6. Now notice verse 7 of this example is not emboldened. Verse 8 is not emboldened, but now verse 9 is. So a new paragraph begins in verse 9. So your first paragraph is John 1 through 5. Your second paragraph is John 1, 6 through 8. And now your third paragraph begins in verse 9 of chapter 1. And you move forward in that process as you study the chapters. You may already have a Bible that emboldens letters, and you didn't even know that was what it was there for. But again, not every Bible does this, but it's a great tool if you can find it. Now, let's go on to a second example. Again, the emboldened number. It's the first example. The second example is recognizing a paragraph sign. Other Bibles use the paragraph sign, which is like a backward P with a dark embold around the inward portion of the P and a line following. It's a paragraph sign. And guess what? Every time you see that paragraph sign, what does that indicate? That indicates that scholars have already decided that that paragraph or that portion of Scripture begins a new thought, a major theme, another idea. And so as we study in our example, we see a paragraph sign at the beginning of verse 17 in Matthew 5:17 through 22. Now notice a paragraph sign is not seen again until verse 21. So your paragraph in chapter 5 is beginning in 17 and runs all the way through verse 20. And then a new paragraph begins in verse 21 and runs all the way through verse 22. So if you were dividing chapter 5 of Matthew into paragraphs, one paragraph would be 17 through 20. The next paragraph would be 21 through 22 based on the paragraph sign. And that original paragraph would maintain itself until you see another paragraph sign come, or you arrive at verse 1 of the next chapter. So a second way of seeing whether or not you have a division in a chapter is a paragraph sign. Emboldened number 1, example, paragraph sign number 2. A third method of dividing each chapter into sections is to utilize subtitles already placed in most study Bibles. These Bibles will have subtitles that describe actions or what's taking place in a particular grouping of scriptures. However, these subtitles may not necessarily match up with scholarly divisions in regard to the grammar that involves a paragraph. However, many of these study Bibles include or show a change in subject matter. The Expositor Study Bible has titles or subtitles throughout, giving us an indication of where a new subject has begun. So it might be a Bible that you could use to help notify yourself that, hey, in this portion of the chapter, a new idea has started. Look at Romans 1. As an example on 3, it says here above the verses, Paul introduces himself and the gospel of Jesus Christ. So in Romans 1:1, we see the text and we see it ongoing. But then a little later in verse 18, we see the subtitle. Go to the second page now on the back side. It says, God reveals himself in his creation. That's a subtitle that indicates that verse 18 just might be a great place for a division. Then again, we see another division. God gives man up to his unrighteousness in verse 21. The subtitles are clear. They encompass a subject title that it tries to cover the full gamut of a certain text. And this might be a great clue. So far you have 3 procedures or 3 possible helps in dividing chapters into paragraph. You look for Bibles with the emboldened number. Number 2, you look for Bibles with the paragraph sign. Number 3, you look for Bibles and work that's already done with subtitles. The fourth method, once again, is probably a more grammatical, scholarly, structural way, and that is the indentation. Indenting indicates that a new paragraph has begun. A new paragraph is indented, and the accompanying verse of the paragraph is not. An indentation marks the beginning of a new paragraph or train of thought. And now let's look at example 4 using indentations. Verse 17, and the 70 returned again with joy. We see that verse 17 is indented. So there's a subject matter. And again, subject matters, paragraphs are totally subjected. You can divide a verse into paragraphs if you want. But in verse 18, it's indented, so we see that another subject has been introduced. And he said unto them, I beheld Satan, etc., etc. And you see that 18, 19, and 20 are gathered together as a paragraph. Then, in example 4, verse 21, you see the indentation again. And it says, in that hour Jesus rejoiced in spirit. And in this paragraph, we find verses 21 and 22 completing a certain idea or major thought. Then, verse 23 is indented, and he turned unto his disciples and said privately, etc., etc. And we find that verses 23 and 24 are in fact a part of a specific paragraph. So you have 4 tools that you can now use to try to divide your chapter of the Bible book that you're required to outline into divisions, into topics, into paragraphs. You can use the emboldened number 1. You can use the backward P, the paragraph sign. You can use subtitles, number 3, or you could use indentations, number 4, that clearly define where scholars have already stated everything but the subtitles, where scholars have clearly stated this is where one paragraph starts and another one begins. And if you don't like scholarly efforts in this, you can come up with your own. All right. Let's take a look at the assignment itself now, following the second half of page 2. It says, remember that this project is subject to the student's opinion in regard to divisions. You are to divide each chapter into a minimum of at least 3 major sections. And again, you may have as many sections per chapter as you feel are needed. Don't stop at 3 when you see plainly that there are 5 or 6. At times, you may feel that a chapter division in itself is wrong. And in other words, you may go beyond the chapter and go into the next chapter and utilize a verse or two if you want to include, for instance, say you were in Mark, I'll just give you the chapter. Let's say you were in chapter 10 of Romans and you felt like chapter 11 verse 1 should have been included in the last paragraph in chapter 10. You can do that. It's totally subjective. I hope you're getting that by now. Feel free to insert verses from the next chapter into the final section of your outline for that chapter. Also, in a chapter that is very short, you may need to divide a verse into more than one section in order to come up with 3 divisions. So, as I said, you don't have to stop with verses. You could have 3 verses and 6 paragraphs. Let's see. Now, let's go on to the 3rd paragraph here. All outlines are to be typed. College level course, no handwriting turned in, everything typed. Please allow the following format and please follow it displayed in the example below. So here's how your divisions and your chapters should be labeled. This is how they should look. First of all, use the book name and appropriate number to indicate a chapter. Notice this, that I've used the book of Revelation as an example. I've put in Revelation number 1 and centered it, and then to the far left, I put Roman numeral number 1. In the center, I gave a title, and on the far right, the verses that I feel are the paragraph division. So my first division of Revelation 1 is verses 1 through 3. After close evaluation of the content of those verses, I gave it the title, Introduction and Blessing. I am not opposed to you taking titles from people that have already produced them. If you find them, they're accurate and they're good, utilize them. Sometimes there's no sense in reinventing the wheel. But your titles should be short, they should be concise, and when you look at that title, it should remind you of the content that you discovered in that particular portion of Scripture. In this case, Revelation, Roman numeral 2, we see it far left. The title, Salutation. The verses involved, verse 4. And then section 3, the ministry of Christ, verses 5 through 8. So you can see how you divide the verses and you label those verses on the right. You give a section number using a Roman numeral to the far left, and in the center, you give your title, your evaluation of what you found. So, if we're doing Romans chapter 1, you have to divide Romans chapter 1 into at least 3 divisions. You mark those divisions by Roman numerals. You title those divisions, and to the far right, in a proper form, you give me the verses that you assigned to that particular paragraph or major thought. It is a work that makes you better acquainted with the content of the Bible book that you are studying. And you say, well, Brother Larson, you have us do that in every single class. Doesn't matter which class that we do. Doesn't matter which class we have. If it's a Bible class with you, you'll have us do that. I will. And for your sake, you better pray you're in Colossians and not Isaiah. Colossians, you'll divide 4 chapters up into paragraph divisions. But if you were with me in Isaiah and we were doing the whole book, you'd be dividing 66 chapters up into divisions. I want you to understand what's in the book that you're studying. And this is a way that you can do just that. I'll say this and then I'll close out this instructional video. Anytime that you've ever heard me teach, anytime that you've ever heard me preach, it has always been my methodology to study the paragraph that the Lord gave me that involves the verse that He led me to. In other words, again, I'll use John 3:16. If God is pushing John 3:16 on my heart to preach, I go to that particular chapter and I locate the paragraph that John 3:16 exists in. And then I study that paragraph and find my message from the content. So what I'm asking you to do is a first stage, a first step in Bible study that will not only help you understand the content of the Bible book that you're studying, but it will also prepare those of you that feel a call to ministry, a call to preach or teach. It'll be the first thing that you do in a methodology of trying to exegete the scriptures, interpret the setting, et cetera, of any one book. So it does take a little bit of time. It does take a little bit of thought. And if you'll use the form that I have given you, if you'll follow the example that I have given you, if you'll look for these tools, it'll go a whole lot easier. I'll say this as well. A lot of the New American Standard Bibles have the emboldened letter or the paragraph sign already in them. A lot of New King James Version Bibles have this as well. For whatever reason, I've noticed that they, in particular, probably do this for their Bibles more often than not. And that's not really even a publisher. But so just keep an eye out for that Bible, that paragraph sign, that emboldened number, that indent. And like I said, you may be holding a Bible right now in your hand that has all these tools or some of them in that. You didn't even know what they are. But now you've been informed, and I pray that this instruction will help you fulfill the assignment in a timely and well thought out manner. Thank you.